All right, yeah, hi, just for a quick introduction. So I'm Rebecca. I'm helping run this ecology workshop. I have previous competitive experience for Brookwood High School in Georgia, and I also was the president of UChicago Science Olympiad and am an event supervisor for a few states and regionals. So yeah, I did ecology and I have a lot of background in it. I studied it in college too. So that's my credentials, I guess, for talking about it today. And I'm just going to introduce basically the event overview for newcomers to the event, specific topic areas that come up frequently and are tested on frequently, and more quantitative tips, especially how to do some calculations and usage of formulas, and how to prepare your note sheet and study in general. So that's kind of the breakdown for today. So for the event overview, so this year's ecology iteration is covering North American biomes. So this is testing specifically ecology and adaptations in featured biomes of North America. For this event, you can only bring one, normal size, letter size sheet of paper, front and back note sheet. But these can contain any sort of information, pictorial to, textual. So I will talk about a bit later on how to best prepare that note sheet. And one calculator or two calculators, one per competitor is allowed. So just to start off with the North American biome focus, so there's a lot of biomes or different climatic regions represented in North America. But most importantly, we would want to note the temperate deciduous forest and the taiga and tundra. Those are outlined in the rules. There will be questions perhaps touching on coniferous forests, grasslands, and deserts, as they do make up a large part of North American geography. But specifically, we'll focus on these. So the topic areas for ecology are split into three distinct parts. Part one being a general review of principles of ecology. This is more foundational, and part two is focusing more on those terrestrial ecosystems as outlined before, the deciduous forest, taiga, tundra. And part three is more of that anthropogenic impacts and human influence on ecosystems. And that kind of looks more like how we impact the environment, clean energy usage, conservation, etc. Okay, so for part one of the review of the general principles, in the rules, they are listed. I've just put them here. I won't read over them because we'll go through one by one. But at the regional and state level, so it will focus on more on local and regional ecology, which is important too, because that varies by, the region. So the first foundational concept is just understanding very thoroughly the idea of a food web and a trophic pyramid. For this one, what's most key here is just understanding kind of that like population pyramid structure, how energy transfer is, the 10% rule from a trophic level to another trophic level, and how these tie together with consumers, decomposers, predators, and producers. So I think what is really useful here is for your specific region, and I'm just speaking to maybe the Southeast here, because this is a Georgia Tech presentation, know the like case studies of like biomes or ecosystems in your region, specifically the organisms that live there. So maybe this example I have here is not as relevant. We don't have lions and tigers in Georgia, but we do have, for example, like wolves and eagles, thrushes, frogs, so things like that. So I think for regions, it's very important to know specific food lines, food webs that apply there, and be able to identify just from any food web or food pyramid the position of an organism and how much energy it receives. The next important thing is nutrient cycling. So for each of the cycles, and there are quite a few, I think it's really useful to really memorize or understand each step, especially how they are modulated and regulated by the atmospheric component, the geological slash like physical component on land, and also the water-based component too, hydrological. So they're interlinked, and there's also human impacts in each one, human inputs and outputs. So for the carbon cycle, this is the foundational one. This is the basis of how forests generate carbon and how humans use fossil fuels and produce more carbon into the atmosphere and how it goes back to the ocean. I would recommend putting all of these nutrient cycles either in sort of maybe just an actual picture onto your note sheet, or maybe in a simplified skeletal manner where you write out all the steps. So the carbon one is the first major one. Second one is nitrogen. So it gets tested a lot, nitrogen as one of the key components or nutrients in plants, plant biology. So this one is crucial to understand the names of all the specific types of chemical transformations or reactions that are occurring. So this would include knowing ammonification, exactly how the ion transfer works there and which compounds are involved, nitrification and cycling through into plants assimilation, and also how nitrogen is fixed in the roots of plants with the symbiotic relationship with decomposers and nitrate fixing bacteria, and also the atmospheric component and how nitrogen fixation happens via lightning and other natural phenomena. So the nitrogen cycle, very frequent question. So know those steps. And another cycle that's important in agricultural context is phosphorus cycle, also for plants biology. So phosphorus cycle also cycles through all the atmospheric land-based and ocean-based areas. And this is also understanding that for human inputs of fertilizers, this causes also eutrophication or like just pollution into the water systems of phosphorus can increase or change like population dynamics for plants. And then the next one is also the water cycle, the foundational one, regarding how water is transferred throughout the atmosphere on Earth. So this is more understanding how these steps can play an effect in an ecosystem too. So water cycle and some lesser and but still important cycles would include calcium. Calcium is more of a minor element involved in animal and plant biology, but it does have quite a few steps too, specifically and particularly with the dissolution in water and entrance into sediments and rocks. So last one would be potassium. This is also an important fertilizer chemical, and it is produced and inputted by animals, specifically through manure. And the ion exchange is important to know here. So I just think for overall nutrient cycles would be really good to study those intensely. And oh, sorry, I thought there was more, but sulfur. Sulfur is also the last one. And sulfur has its more unique input via, the burning of fossil fuels and in the atmosphere too, and through deposition, through rain. The next part that is very important is understanding interactions. So the first category I'm covering is interspecific. So this would involve between different species and beyond just the most basic of competition and mutualism. It is also important to understand sort of the ones where there are also neutral to positive effects or negative effects, but for example, amensalism, where you have one negatively affected and one neutral affected organism, and commensalism and neutralism. I think for these, using and understanding these plus minus zero indicators for kind of this chart is very useful, and having specific examples for each. So on the right-hand side, there's examples, but going back to the understanding how regional ecology is tested more for at the state regional level, try to find examples in the specific regional ecology that you live in. And the next part that comes up a lot is competition, the idea also of specific, interspecific or intraspecific competition. So the key to this is understanding that in any sort of ecosystem, you're limited by resources, and therefore you're limited by which resources you can go for and what roles you can have in that ecosystem. So this would be that competitive exclusion principle. There cannot be something for everyone, so therefore there must be division into different niches. And there's different types of competition exist based on either behavioral or other physical barriers or different in different regions or different ecosystems, different types of competition are used. So I just put some like lists of topics here to go into depth more for your students when they study and to look into. And understanding limiting factors is important. So for density dependent limiting factors, these will depend on the number of organisms or the population of a species in the ecosystem. And that obviously affects things like disease spread or parasites spread, and competition, and also just resource availability when you have limited resources. And density independent factors would be those that are external to the population, and this would be climate and weather events, especially seasonal cycles, drought cycles, monsoon cycles, or catastrophic random events like fires and hurricanes. And also human-caused habitat alteration, destruction, and human-caused pollution. The other big quantitative topic to understand here is the population growth equations in those models. So for example, the fundamental idea of population growth is that it is exponential with a growth rate that is applied to the existing population. But with the limited resources in real life, we have logistic growth more commonly, or more commonly seen at the macro scale. And this is limited by the carrying capacity, where we have a specific number of organisms that can be supported given a specific amount of resources in that ecosystem. So understanding how to use these equations is very key. Just knowing how to use a growth rate and input your carrying capacity and initial population numbers. Within this vein, the R and K selection theory comes into play. So understanding just what an R-selected species versus a K-selected species is. So for R-selected species, we have much more exponential and boom and bust cycles, particularly those with short gestation times, high fecundity, and usually they don't live very long. So that's, for example, things like mice, and the opposite would be K-selected species, which they have lower numbers of organisms that can be supported and longer gestation times, and they are usually larger organisms that require more resource in general to stay alive and more energy. So similar to this is the idea of the survivorship curve, where you have type 1, 2, and 3 organisms based on the number of survivors and the percentage of the maximum lifespan. So for trout, fish, salmon, there are frequently many offspring, but the survival rate is very low. So they kind of go for a high volume, but low survival rate strategy. Humans are the opposite end with type 1, where we go for only one offspring is produced at a time with high investment, parental and energy-wise, and they live much longer and die slowly. The other idea in here is the population doubling equations. So these are derived from those Verhulst population growth exponential equation. So the key is to use the rule of 70. If you want to find a doubling time, take 70 and divide by the rate of growth. Or if you want to find the time to double in population, you can take the natural log of 2 and divide it by k. So that is also an equation that comes up a lot. Another higher level advanced population equation is the Lotka-Volterra predation model. This I'll just go into briefly. So the idea is that when you do have a predator and prey species, not only are the predators, their population sizes are affecting each other. So a predator can only grow in its population if it has enough prey to eat. But once you are depleting the prey populations, you are also decreasing the predator populations. But then when you have less predators, you can have more prey that grow again. So you can see how these modulate and regulate each other, kind of in this graph on the right, this manner, where you have a lag time between when you see the effects of increased predation on increased or decreased prey numbers and vice versa. So this comes up frequently. It's a derivation of that population logistic growth model, but you're introducing the new components of the effect of one species, the prey, on the predator, and also opposite. So these are just once again introducing more variables to model a real life situation, which frequently occurs. So the next idea I will introduce is selection. So this is another branch. Selection leads into the ideas of natural selection, variation, and evolution, another major concept in ecology and evolutionary biology. So this is the idea that when you have genetic and inheritable mutations in a population, you can have variation. And this leads to differential reproductive success, in which case certain traits will make you more adapted to a certain environment and make your population able to survive better. So under this is important to understand how things such as the different adaptations, such as mimicry for one. I bring this one up because it comes up with many different types of mimicry. So for example, like Batesian mimicry, there's a few others, but I would look into that. Speciation, there's different barriers that are there for speciation. Some that are prior to the formation of a zygote, so prior to mating, and then some that are post, after the zygote is formed. And some based on geographic interferences, or some that are based not on those. So allopatric and sympatric would be the different types of speciation there, whether it's within a population that's separated or within a population that's not, but becomes genetically separated. And understanding cases of adaptive radiation. So for example, Darwin's finches, it's a classic example, and character displacement. So just those adaptive changes within a population over time. Yeah, and then moving on to regional ecology. So the Southeast region, I would focus there if you're going to compete in Georgia. But I would recommend looking at those keystone species that exist in Georgian ecosystems and the most common species as well. Some endangered species, not maybe not as many, but there are just understanding like what species are endemic to this area. Flora and fauna wise, both can get tested. And also regional climate trends. So how are climate trends changing in this region over time? And how does agriculture impact the environment as well, especially with runoff or grazing, and then also knowing, yeah, once again, case studies specific to the region. And then part two is diving into that terrestrial ecosystem component where we focus on just the tundra, taiga, deciduous forests. So this is more about understanding biodiversity within these biomes. And at the higher levels of state and nationals, you want to be able to apply knowledge of biodiversity, for example, maps or simulations of selection on populations. And at nationals level only, there is more of an emphasis on how to calculate different indices for biodiversity. I will go into one of those examples later. Okay, and one thing I wanted to introduce also that I've seen before is this Köppen climate classification system. And this is, it uses different letters to indicate climate, and they're also respective precipitation temperature profiles. You can classify all of the Earth into these categories, but they're rather fine gradations. So this is interesting to look at, sometimes comes up. But yeah, so for then part three, the human impact on ecosystems, this is specifically more about climate change and how invasive species and other pollution influenced phenomena can impact your environment. Also in this category is the discussion of pros and cons of using alternative energy and how those can impact the environment. So for that, I would recommend studying on things like what is the pros and cons of hydropower, solar, electric, wind, and how these are used and how effective they are as well. And the goals of conservation biology. So that's understanding more of the conservation side, remediation side, and similar to that, how can we recover disturbed areas, clean up destroyed environments, and how can we reintroduce species successfully to revitalize environments? And at the Division C state and nationals level, you do want to answer questions pertaining to case studies. But I have been emphasizing that case studies come up a lot, so just across all levels of competition. And for Division C only, there is a new emphasis on understanding traditional ecological knowledge, which I will go into a little bit later. So for the tundra, first, understanding and diving into the threats that are predominantly affecting the tundra, that would include majorly climate change, also air pollution and industrial activity. So that would be like mining, pipeline activity, human impact. And also there's, because of climate change, invasive and migrating species that are changed, their populations are changed in the tundra. And the taiga, it's similar, but we have more of an issue of deforestation, also commercial activity, and an acid rain issue as well. And for the deciduous forest, there's, because of deforestation, there is also fragmentation of ecosystems. Overpopulation because of changing ecosystem conditions. So overpopulation of things like deer, and also introduction of invasive species, introduced species, particularly plants and animals that greatly impact the deciduous environment. And bigger issue with pollution because a lot more humans and human or urban or just human-based activity, they live around, I guess, these biomes. So there's much more pollution impact. And fire suppression. So in the deciduous forest, there does need to be occasional fires to kind of create or destroyed or organic matter to create nutrients, and then also to clear space for succession. And there are issues when you have climate change impacting precipitation and temperature throughout the year. And acid rain is once again an important factor in deciduous forests because of that human slash industrial activity close to these areas, which are impacted which impact the deposition of rain that occurs there. And with the traditional ecological knowledge, I think this is important to just understand the different categorizations of the US geography based on its regional features and its closest watersheds, its rivers, specifically how those are important to the traditional and indigenous communities that lived around there, making them hubs for their agriculture or their economic activity. And so for quantitative tips, I recommend writing all the formulas down onto the note sheets. Um, I think it's easier to handwrite these a lot of the times when you can't really format them well in LaTeX or whatever equation input software you have. And another thing is that just having equations down is one thing, but you must know which each variable stands for. And to help you with that, I think it's really good to write a solved example of each sort of equation into your note sheet. So you can always know how to do it, or if it's not as direct as just plugging in, how to reverse engineer an answer that you need. And if you have encountered any sort of plot or graph before you've never seen when you're taking an exam, I recommend it. I recommend looking at it and figuring it out first by just noting the axes and if there's context provided to read that. I think it can be intimidating if you see a graph or plot that you've never ever encountered before, but usually you can deduce your way out of that by figuring out what is being plotted. And on top of that, if you can keep in mind which of those plots that you didn't know were during the exam, you can put them on your note sheet for the future. Um, and okay, I just threw in an example for calculating the Shannon index. So this is a biodiversity index. And the way this works, so we're going to be having species and their frequencies given, usually most of the time. So in this specific ecosystem, we have 5 species and they have varying occurrences. So what you will take is the proportion of the species out of all the species. So for example, this 0.38 for species A, that's taking 40 divided by the summation of all the species here. And you do that for each of those. Then you take the natural log of that proportion and you will get these negative numbers, right? And then you will multiply that proportion by the natural log of the proportion. And then finally, when you have that, you do want to take the negative sum of all of those together. So you're going to add up all these values on the right-hand column and take the negative of that, which there you get a Shannon index. For this one, it's 1.49. You can use your calculator if you want to check that, but that is how you would do a Shannon index. And then for note sheet tips, I would recommend organizing a note sheet by the 3 parts that I outlined earlier and topic areas, so you can easily figure out when you encounter a question, which part you should reference in your note sheet. I used landscape orientation for mine just because I found that to be more space efficient, especially user friendly. And using 3 columns helped a lot too. So maybe 3 columns also to help organizing and finding information rather than all in a clump or lump of text. And use a small size font, sans serif, to also increase more of that space you have on the note sheet. And you can minimize margins in Word to decrease the space between columns and also the space with the outside of the paper, edge of the paper. In the note sheet, I would include a lot of pictures if possible, frequent common diagrams, all those nutrient cycles I mentioned before, any sort of graphs that come up, perhaps some things maybe with like precipitation temperature charts for different biomes, and some population graphs, and also those equations for population and biodiversity indices and the example calculations. I would print in color usually just so I can see those graphs and charts, but also to maybe put certain keywords in color so you can find them easily. I guess highlighter would do for that as well, if you don't do that in printing in color. And use all of the white space, so front and back, and handwrite into any empty space as well. And for preparing for this event, I think if you want to just gain knowledge and prep your note sheet, it's really good to just read ecology textbooks. They're often found on some in the public domain, but some maybe through like your school library or just in your classroom. Find the textbooks, read through those, and supplement with YouTube and Khan Academy content. A lot of those are really good tutorials, for example, to how to use a lot of these formulas and equations that you encounter. And AP biology class is also very useful, or just any sort of biology at the high school level. for learning ecology. And when it does come to taking tests, I recommend taking a lot of practice tests, and you can source these by trading with other schools. So I guess the way it worked for when I was captaining, I would contact a lot of other competitive science Olympiad teams at other high schools, especially if you have invitational tests that are yet unreleased, or maybe region specific, or your school, maybe your students within your team wrote them yourself. So when you have those, you have leverage to trade for other tests from other invitationals that other schools have gone to. And sometimes the invitationals themselves release publicly, which you can just go to that invitational's website and find the test release drive. Past archives, like this is sometimes I don't, not always, sometimes there are past exams posted for different invitationals, or maybe even some regional level ones. Not sure, but you could look for those online or on forums. And if you're exhausting all of those, I would recommend just doing practice questions for ecology specific questions from different test preps for AP biology. So yeah, that is my overall summary on how to prepare for this event and what are the most important topics. Um, I will leave the floor open for more questions. I was just trying to provide more of a guideline for when your students go dive into understanding that knowledge more deeply. But feel free to email me with questions or note sheet help. Yeah, thank you so much for listening to my presentation. I will check if there were any questions. Um, Loading. Oh, sorry. Did I misspeak? Is it deserts and grasslands? I hope not, but or if I'm incorrect, I'm sorry about that. I based it on the last set of the rules that I had. Um, but yeah, any other questions from anyone? And I'm going to just drop my email in the chat for future reference. Well, we have questions on water quality. Those do come up. I think water quality is also very tied to the cycles of different nutrients too. Sorry.
Actually, one sec. Sorry. Oh shoot. Okay. Um, yeah. Actually, if you guys have questions, post them in the Teams. Yeah. I just with Georgia Tech regulations, we're not allowed to have students contact any instructors via email and that stuff.
Oh, okay, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll take that back. Don't contact the email. Contact the teams. There we go. Um, yeah, but on the topic of water quality, yeah, I think that does come up. But in connection to perhaps the human impacts on environment aspect, more so maybe bigger questions of what are the major water quality issues in these regions and biomes from pollution and acid rain, etc. But yeah, once again, they tie very closely to those elemental cycles too. Note the question may sound dumb, but for my note sheets, what are some good formulas needed for the test? Oh, and thank you for the the feedback. But yeah, so the good formulas, yeah, the ones I mentioned with population growth, Shannon index, Simpson index, Lotka-Volterra model, um, uh, and there will be more, I guess, of maybe other indices, but those come up the most, just population calculations. Are there any meetings like this? I think so. Will this meeting be shared? Can you use the presentation? Yeah, I think this is going to be a shared recording, right, Harsha? And I don't mind my slides being published, so.
Yeah, we'll post recordings for this. And then yeah, I believe you actually I want to say the meteorology one already happened, but yeah, they'll be all posted in the workshop recordings channel for the teams. Probably like Monday or Tuesday. So we'll be posting that. Yeah.
Mhm. How much in depth do we need to go for nutrient cycling? It really varies, I think, at invitational and depends on the invitational even, but at the high school hosted invitational level, um, it's will much more be focused on nitrogen, carbon, phosphorus. But if you get to any upper level tournaments, especially at the national level or state level even, you will see a lot more of those more minor cycles come in. So that potassium, calcium, and sulfur, they just have varying environmental significance, but they all happen simultaneously and impact the environment. So it really depends. But if you're going to just go for the most basic ones, that would be yeah, carbon, phosphorus, and nitrogen. Um, yeah, and that's more about just memorizing steps, to be honest, steps of this is the cycle and chemical reactions. I think the chemistry component, if that's what also you're asking about, know the reaction formulas, the chemical equations and formulas. Would you say that knowing specific animal adaptations are important to the test? Yes, I would say that is very important. Yeah, specific animals and specific regional ecology too. Um, I think you should, well, for a lot of those adaptations, I think I mentioned like mimicry, for example, should be able to have an example of a specific type of mimicry, and specific types of climatic adaptations. So if it is deserts and grasslands, and sorry if I am just totally wrong on like which regions they are testing on. Know about for deserts, right? Heat retention or heat dissipation and tactics to retain water, right? Those are most important to surviving there. And in grasslands, uh, plants have different adaptations to survive forest or just fires in general. There's a lot of fires that occur in grasslands. And yeah, I think yes. Short answer is yes. And adaptations for plants and animals. How much of formulas are needed for division B? I don't think, I don't think nearly quite as many. Division B, I can imagine seeing just more basic, like maybe a chart or table, maybe even just like basic population growth, like a death rate and a growth rate. Or knowing that a population each year adds 5 organisms, but 3 die. So what is the net growth, I guess, in like something very simple like that, without involving any sort of, yeah, any sort of those like summations or natural logs or things like that. Um, you mentioned studies specific to the region. I assume you meant the region we were taking tests for. Yes, yes. I just speak generally because I think in, most regions, the test writers tend to just write about their own region that the test is occurring in. But it does not hurt to know for more regions if you want to be more versatile for competing at higher levels, because then they can get less region specific. Should we learn the food webs for specific regions for the test? Yes, I believe that would be very helpful. It goes hand in hand with knowing those key stone species, common species, and endangered species in different regions and different local ecosystems. Um, yeah, I think just having more applications-based knowledge is really useful. I think maybe at the beginner level, it makes sense to just understand, a general food web, one that may not come from like your region, but at the higher levels, we want to gain more knowledge of different types of food webs and ecosystem compositions. Um, it just provides more examples, to be honest, for you to draw on for any of the questions. Yeah. Um, and I guess if case studies is unclear, I would mean things such as understanding, for example, wolves and their population control on deer, or sea otters and urchins for like ocean, more marine and in marine environments, and beavers and their impact too on their environment. So very, very classic examples of situations studied in depth in ecological research, of when you can isolate the impact of one species on the others in its ecosystem. Oh, sorry, I thought I saw another question, but no. Oh, and even cases of like overhunting by humans, human impacts once again. are very key here for part 3. Oh, habitat rehabilitation questions. Yes, sources. I think if you it also kind of ties back to a lot of these are case studies as well. So specifically with conservation or rehabilitation organizations, honestly, like, a lot of their websites have materials on this, more recent materials at least. Perhaps textbooks can be a little outdated, but I think you could look even at state conservation department websites, or like state environmental resources departments. They have websites too. There's a lot of educational material there, and that's once again region specific, so that can help you to have more examples or uh, applied examples to draw from. Um, Yeah, also, I think even maybe like nonprofit organizations that do a lot of that sort of work, they have many materials on their websites, kind of talking about the success or the impact of their rehabilitation efforts. And where can you find ecology practice test resources? Yeah, so I mentioned one way is to do test trading, which is I think a traditional way that how we were able to pass tests around from different schools across the country before. Nowadays, I think maybe your students would know, but there are Discord channels, forums online, and just various communities where students tend to bring tests in and ask to trade with others. But then invitationals also release public tests too. So, for example, like the one I helped run for U Chicago, we publicly release all of our exams every year. So you can find those in the historical archives. Um, and I think just looking up on Google, maybe like a certain invitational and then ecology test release, you might be able to find hits. Does each team member need to have one note sheet for the test? Okay, so it's one note sheet shared between the two people. So not one sheet per member. So yeah, only one sheet, and you can't have duplicates of the same sheet. So you have to think about user ergonomics when you're sharing that sheet as well. So that's why I mentioned so many tricks to make it user friendly to share between one person, or sorry, two people. Yeah, that SciOly.org site has lots of older tests. Yeah, haven't looked at that in a bit, so I'm not sure how updated it is, but older tests, the questions get recycled, so it's all relevant anyways. How would you go about answering questions that aren't multiple choice in a timely manner? For example, creating a trophic pyramid or how to remove invasives. Yeah, I've seen a bit more of a movement away from the short answer type of questions, open answer questions, just because grading wise, they're a bit complex and time consuming. But if you are asked to create from scratch, like a trophic pyramid, um, I don't know how to like do it in more timely manner than just have practiced and really have an understanding of the concept beforehand. I think that's more just like knowing, off the top of your head how to model or diagram something that you've studied before. Um, and maybe like a how to remove invasives question. That sounds more like one of those hypotheticals. Maybe I've seen these too, where they give you a scenario. It's like, oh, how knowing that you have an ecosystem and you have XYZ problem, perhaps overpopulation or something of the sort. How can you introduce an ecologically I guess, informed strategy to kind of control that population. And then that could be a hypothetical where you draw on like common principles such as predation. So introduce a predator, a natural predator, or you think about humans have an impact too, right? Humans can go hunt certain animals and help control the population that way. Um, so I think those are another genre of questions, perhaps answering those sorts of uh, what would you do if you were a field ecologist or a conservation biologist? Um, yeah. And if they're not multiple choice, and you're running out of time, I would recommend just advising students to do the multiple choice first. Um, I think the long answer ones are probably worth more points, but I think the trade-off is better if you can just at least guess on multiple choice ones if you don't have any time. And also I think math questions, they can be faster, like the faster ones of like short answer ones. I'd rather, use an equation and answer that than write a short essay on like a hypothetical. So prioritizing math is a valid strategy. Oh, I think also a lot of questions like the writers like to do multiple answer ones where it's not just one answer choice, but you have to check all that apply. And I think, I don't know, the strategy there is still similar, just usually there's plausible answers, but there's also some very obviously wrong ones. I think it's better usually to err on the side of less or not to err on the side of caution because I think you get partial credit for just having more of the like correct answers chosen. Um, but that varies. You should see how the test is graded or ask before you go about that. Do you have any previous year's papers from your university? Yes, I do. Let me see if I can just get that link in the chat. We do have test drives pretty easily accessible. Um, let's see, past. Well, that website's loading slow, but could just drop the link, I think, here. It's not opening, but maybe for everyone else, yeah. Okay, yeah, no, it loaded now. There's a button that says public test release. That just takes you to a Google Drive, and we have 2023 to 2024 public tests for CNB. Yeah. Yeah, ecology is there too, so that's good. Yep, I see it. And the keys are up as well. Okay, yeah. Yeah, any other questions or requests for advice? I don't know, based on my experience. Oh, I forgot there's a Q&A option. Let me check this. Um, and what calculator do you use? I think you're only allowed a non-graphing, non-programmable calculator. So, I used whatever that one is called. I think it's like is it a Casio one? I don't know. It's like the basic function one. Sometimes if you like don't even have one, they'll just give you the most simple like four function calculators. And those suffice. Like if it can do a natural log, it should suffice, and that's about it. But I yeah, you can just use a basic like a I don't know, for algebra class or pre-calculus class, like that level of calculator. Which topics were the hardest? Hmm, it's a good question. Hmm. Like thinking back to a while ago, actually, when I competed. Um, hmm. I guess it usually would be like short answer questions, like um, I don't know, the ones that are more of explain like your line of thinking or provide evidence. But I would say maybe the hardest upon an initial encounter were the mathematical ones, maybe understanding like yeah, like that Lotka-Volterra model, or like you know, how population dynamics are plotted or graphed. But I think with those, if you understand the concept, they do get a lot easier. I don't know. I think maybe this is a bad answer, but the hardest ones are the ones you like have never seen before. So that's why when I did some exams and they had more like region specific things and I hadn't learned anything about that region, that just kind of like was not easy because there's no way to really I guess come up with like a specific species name if you've never like, even thought about that region. Even despite knowing all the fundamental principles, right? You could still describe the trophic cureman for it. You just don't even know what organisms are in it. So that's, I don't know, maybe that's, yeah, part of it, getting specific enough to be able to like know an example at least for any type of region. Um, yeah, maybe also sometimes there's more earth sciencey graphs, for example, like uh more geological charts and graphs regarding maybe dissolved carbon dioxide, the atmosphere and ocean, like ocean acidification type of questions. So some of those can get more advanced. I think in that test I sent over from my school, there are some harder questions towards the end regarding acidification, and those like diversity indices. So worth taking a look at. Yeah. Oh, and I think comparing and contrasting between the different biomes is useful too. Yeah, just really knowing and understanding what differs between each or what defines each biome. And it kind of goes back to like the climate classification and the organisms present and their adaptations, and the resources available, different soil profiles. Oh, that's another one. Soil profiles. There is a specific soil like triangle that is classifying soils based on their silt, sand, and clay compositions. And on top of that, there's different types of soils for each region. Like, for example, like the tundra and taiga, there's I think they're called pod soils, but they're classified by um, almost no, I guess, organic matter layer. No, yeah, none of that. But then a lot of I guess, yeah, permafrost and things like that. I'll get a name for that. There's a soil classification system, uh, which was pretty niche knowledge, but comes up. Um, yeah, there's like the USDA soil taxonomy. Different countries have different soil classifications, I guess, according to their departments of agriculture. But I don't know if this might be helpful just because I brought up the one in boreal forests, just a Wikipedia link. But yeah, podzols have other distributions of organic matter. And yeah, they vary also like on the alluvial zone, which is like, where water can leach into. Also the complex minerals or dissolved content that's found in different layers. Okay, another question. Oh, I thought I saw one. Never mind. Uh, and maybe last thing, on the topic of soils, agricultural impacts sometimes can be a little bit more overrepresented. So maybe looking at crops specific to your region. So maybe in Georgia, looking at like the specifics of and impacts of like different crops that are farmed here commonly, uh, and what they do to the environment. I don't know, thinking, yeah, like I think in Georgia there's also like invasive species like kudzu, and then there's crops like, yeah, pecans, cotton, things like that, onions, and they all have different resource requirements and impacts. Yeah. Yeah, and on that topic, not only just crops, but animal, like commercial animal operations. Um, so yeah, the runoff is different from the manure of like a large cow getting the word for this, but like a large cow farm versus like a pig farm or chickens. Um, what are called I think they're called CAFOs, I guess. Yeah, concentrated animal feeding operations. So these are like mega uh, facilities that raise industrial, agricultural meat products or animal products in general. Yeah, it's called, I guess, CAFOs. Um, these. Okay, I think that's 8. Yeah, end of the session. But questions, please put them in the teams. I will check those. And yeah, thank you everyone for listening.